Ancient empires ranked by hygiene. Who was really cleanest? Alright, let's talk about something we don't usually think about when we picture ancient civilizations: hygiene. Or more specifically, the fact that most of human history absolutely reeks. When you imagine ancient Rome or Egypt, you probably picture marble statues, grand temples, maybe some togas or pyramids. What you probably don't picture is the smell. But trust me, the smell was there. Most of history smelled really, really bad. But here's the interesting thing: not all ancient civilizations were equally gross. Some cultures were surprisingly sophisticated about cleanliness, with advanced plumbing, daily bathing rituals, and even early forms of deodorant. Others, well, let's just say you would not want to time travel there without a gas mask and a hazmat suit. So tonight we're ranking ancient empires by hygiene. We're talking about who bathed, who didn't, who had toilets, who had sewers, who used soap, and who thought water was basically witchcraft. We'll go from the civilizations that would make a modern germaphobe weep to the ones that were honestly cleaner than medieval Europe. Spoiler, most of them. We'll talk about ancient toilets, communal bathing, the invention of soap, and why the Romans had a sponge on a stick that everyone shared. Yes, really. So light your candle, maybe take a shower in appreciation of modern plumbing, and let's dive into the surprisingly fascinating world of ancient hygiene. Before we start ranking, we need to establish what we're actually measuring. Ancient hygiene isn't just about whether people bathed. It's a complex system involving water access, waste management, cultural attitudes, and technology. Here's what we're looking at: water access and plumbing. Did they have running water, aqueducts, indoor plumbing, or were people hauling buckets from the river? Bathing practices. How often did people bathe? Was it daily, weekly, yearly? Never. Was bathing seen as healthy or dangerous? Waste management. Where did the poop go? Did they have toilets, sewers, or was it just streets? Personal hygiene products. Did they have soap, toothpaste, deodorant, perfume? What about razors and grooming tools? Public health infrastructure. Were the public baths, laundries, systems for keeping cities clean? Cultural attitudes. Did the culture value cleanliness? Were there religious or social reasons to be clean? Now, we're specifically looking at ancient civilizations here, roughly before 500 CE. So no medieval Europe, no Renaissance Italy, nothing that came later. We're keeping it old school. Also, we're judging these civilizations at their peak, not during their decline. Rome at its height was very different from Rome falling apart. Ready? Let's start from the bottom and work our way up to the surprisingly clean champions of the ancient world. Number 8, Ancient Mesopotamia, 3500–539 BCE. They tried a word. Starting at the bottom of our list, we have ancient Mesopotamia, the civilizations between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, including the Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians. Now, to be fair to Mesopotamia, they were basically inventing civilization from scratch. Writing, laws, cities, agriculture, they were figuring all this stuff out for the first time. So maybe we shouldn't judge them too harshly for not having figured out plumbing yet. But yeah, the hygiene situation was not great. The Mesopotamians did understand that cleanliness was important. They had some basic hygiene practices. Washing rituals. People would wash their hands and face before prayers and meals. Bathhouses. Wealthy people had private bathrooms in their homes with clay tubs. Soap-like substance, they made a cleaning agent from alkali and oils, not quite soap, but close. Perfumes and oils. Heavy use of scented oils, partly for religious reasons, partly to mask odor. They also had some surprisingly advanced ideas about public health. The Code of Hammurabi, around 1750 BCE, included regulations about clean water and waste disposal. They understood that dirty water could make you sick, which is more than many later civilizations could say. The problem was infrastructure, or rather, the lack of it. No real sewage system. Waste was typically dumped in the streets or in pits. Limited water access. Most people had to carry water from rivers or wells. No public baths. Unlike later civilizations, there was no culture of communal bathing. Hot climate, plus no deodorant. Mesopotamia is hot. People were sweating constantly with limited ways to stay fresh. Bathing was something you did occasionally, not daily. For most people, it involved heating water over a fire and washing from a basin. This was time consuming and fuel intensive, so it didn't happen often. The streets of ancient Babylon or Ur would have been pretty ripe. Animal waste, human waste, rotting garbage, and the general smell of thousands of unwashed people in a hot climate. Not pleasant. The verdict. Mesopotamia gets points for trying and not having some religious and cultural emphasis on cleanliness, but the infrastructure just wasn't there. They're at the bottom of our list, though to be fair, they were doing this 5,000 years ago. Cut them some slack. Hygiene rating 3 out of 10. They understood the concept, but the execution was rough. Number 7, Ancient Greece, 800-146 BCE. This is a philosophical approach to not bathing. Next up, we have Ancient Greece, and this is where things get complicated. Because the Greeks had the knowledge and technology to be clean, they just chose not to use it that way. Here's the weird thing about ancient Greece. They invented public baths, they had sophisticated water systems, they valued physical fitness and the human body, and yet many Greeks didn't actually bathe that often. The Greeks had a complicated relationship with water. They associated it with purification and healing, but they also thought too much bathing was unhealthy and made you soft. There was this whole philosophical debate about whether frequent bathing was decadent and un-Greek. Spartans famously thought bathing in hot water was for weaklings, cold water only and not too often. Real men should smell like sweat and be covered in dust from the wrestling ground. That was the ideal. Don't get me wrong, the Greeks had some impressive hygiene infrastructure. Public gymnasiums. These had cold water pools for washing after exercise. Baths. Later in Greek history, they developed proper bathhouses, though nothing like what Rome would have later built. Olive oil. Athletes would coat themselves in olive oil, exercise, then scrape it off with a curved tool called a strigil. This removed dirt and sweat, though whether this counts as bathing is debatable. Perfumes. Greeks used a lot of scented oils and perfumes to mask body odor. Latrines. Public toilets existed, though they were pretty basic. The problems. The main issue was cultural attitude. Greeks, especially Spartans and the more conservative city-states, saw frequent bathing as suspicious. It was associated with luxury and Persian influence, and Greeks did not want to be like Persians. Athens was a bit better. Wealthier Athenians might bathe every few days, and there were public baths available. But for most Greeks, bathing was an occasional thing, not a daily ritual. Also, Greek sewage systems were not great. Better than Mesopotamia, sure, but waste management was still mostly throw it on the street and hope it rains soon. The ancient Greek historian Aristophanes made jokes about how the streets of Athens were basically open sewers. That should tell you something. Greece had the technology but not the culture. They could have been clean, they just didn't prioritize it. Philosophers would rather debate the nature of reality than take a bath. Hygiene rating 4 out of 10. Had the tools, didn't use them. At least they had olive oil. Number 6, ancient Persia, 550 to 330 BCE, the empire that loved water. Moving up the list, we get to ancient Persia, and finally we're seeing some serious appreciation for cleanliness. The Achaemenid Persian Empire was huge. At its peak, it stretched from Egypt to India. And unlike the Greeks who conquered them, the Persians actually took hygiene seriously. Persians had a religious obligation to be clean. Zoroastrianism, the dominant religion, emphasized purity. Water was considered sacred, and cleanliness was next to godliness, literally. This meant regular bathing. Persians bathed frequently, often daily. Extensive water systems. Persian engineers built some of the most impressive water management systems in the ancient world. Qanats. Those were underground channels that transported water from mountains to cities, keeping it clean and cool. Public baths. Persian cities had public bathhouses. The Persians were seriously good at water management. Their Qanat system was so sophisticated that many are still in use today in Iran. These underground channels could transport water for miles without it evaporating in the desert heat. Persian palaces like Persepolis had elaborate plumbing systems with drainage for wastewater. The royal palace had private bathrooms with running water, something that wouldn't become common in Europe for another 2,000 years. They also had this thing called a badgir, or wind catcher, an architectural feature that would cool buildings using airflow. Combined with water features, Persian buildings were kept surprisingly comfortable even in hot climates. Persians took personal grooming seriously. Perfumes. Persian perfumes were legendary, exported across the ancient world. Hair care. Both men and women spent time on hair care, using oils and styling. Beards. Persian men maintain elaborate, carefully groomed beards. Hand washing. Ritual hand washing before meals was standard. So why aren't Persians at the top of our list? A few reasons. First, a lot of this was concentrated in cities and among the wealthy. Rural Persians probably had hygiene practices closer to Mesopotamia. Second, while they had good personal hygiene, their sewage systems weren't quite as sophisticated as some other civilizations we'll get to. And third, their obsession with water purity meant they were actually reluctant to let wastewater go back into water sources, which sometimes led to waste management issues. Persians definitely understood the assignment. They valued cleanliness for religious and cultural reasons, and they had the engineering to back it up. But there is still room for improvement. Hygiene rating 6 out of 10. Solid effort, impressive water systems, but not quite at the top. Number 5, ancient Egypt. 3100 to 30 BCE, the civilization that invented toothpaste. Now we're getting into the civilizations that really had their act together. Ancient Egypt was surprisingly sophisticated about hygiene, and honestly, they deserve more credit for this. Egyptians were obsessed with cleanliness, and this came from both religious and practical reasons. Egypt is hot. The Nile floods annually. Disease was a constant threat. Being clean wasn't just nice, it was survival. Egyptian priests, in particular, had strict cleanliness requirements. Shaved their entire bodies, yes, everywhere, every few days. Bathed multiple times a day in cold water. Wore only clean linen garments. Couldn't wear wool, considered unclean. Had to be circumcised. Regular Egyptians didn't go quite this far, but cleanliness was still highly valued across society. This is where Egypt really shines. They invented or pioneered a bunch of hygiene products: toothpaste, tooth powder. Egyptians made a cleaning powder from crushed rock salt, mint, dried iris flowers, and pepper. They rubbed this on their teeth with their fingers or a reed brush. It was abrasive as hell and probably damaged tooth enamel, but it worked. Breath mints. They made little pellets of myrrh, frankincense, and honey to refresh breath. Deodorant. They created the first deodorants using scented oils and substances like carob or incense mixed with porridge. Cosmetics. While partly aesthetic, Egyptian makeup had practical purposes. Kohl eyeliner contained lead compounds that may have helped prevent eye infections, and it definitely reduced sun glare. Soap. Egyptians made an early form of soap from animal and vegetable oils mixed with alkaline salts. Razors. Bronze and copper razors for shaving were common. Egyptians bathed regularly, usually daily for those who could afford it. Wealthy people had bathrooms in their homes with limestone tubs. Others would wash in the Nile or from basins. Servants would often pour water over their employers as kind of a shower. After bathing, people would apply scented oils to their skin to prevent drying in the harsh climate. The super wealthy had elaborate bathrooms with copper pipes that brought in water. Not quite running water as we know it, but servants would keep large vessels filled for bathing. Egyptian toilets were okay, not great, not terrible. Wealthy homes had dedicated toilet rooms with limestone seats over pots of sand. Workers' villages had communal latrines. Waste was typically removed manually and dumped outside the city or used as fertilizer. No real sewage systems, but better organization than many civilizations. Here's something funny. Rich Egyptians wore cones of scented fat on their heads at parties. As the evening went on and it got hot, the fat would slowly melt, releasing perfume and running down their hair and clothes. This served as both perfume and a way to keep cool. So yes, ancient Egyptian parties featured people with melting perfume cones on their heads. History is weird. Why not higher? Egypt was impressive, but they still had issues. No real sewerage systems for cities. Most of the really good hygiene practices were limited to the wealthy and priests. The Nile, while providing water, was also where people dumped waste. Rural Egypt was probably pretty rough. The verdict. Egypt invented so much of what we think of as hygiene that they deserve huge credit. They understood dental care, body odor, and the importance of regular bathing thousands of years before most civilizations. Hygiene rating 7 out of 10, innovative and ahead of their time, but infrastructure could be better. Number 4, ancient China. 2070 BCE, 220 CE, the dynasty of dentistry. Ancient China deserves way more recognition for their hygiene innovations. While Europe was still figuring out basic sanitation, various Chinese dynasties were inventing toothbrushes and pioneering dental care. What China actually invented. Let's start with the impressive list of firsts. The toothbrush, 1498, technically just outside our time frame, but teeth cleaning tools date back much earlier. The Chinese invented the first toothbrush with bristles, using bristles from pigs' necks attached to bamboo or bone handles. Before this, they used chewing sticks, twigs with frayed ends used to clean teeth. Toilet paper, 7th century CE. China invented paper, so of course they also invented toilet paper. The first recorded use was by a Chinese emperor, Before this, people used stones, leaves, or whatever was handy. Paper was a huge upgrade. Toothpaste. Various forms of tooth cleaning powders and pastes, including some that used ginseng, salt, and herbs. Bathing culture. Chinese attitudes towards bathing varied by dynasty and region, but generally, bathing was considered both a health practice and a social ritual. Public bathhouses existed in cities. Hot baths were popular, often used heated stones to warm water. Wealthy families had private bathing rooms. Medicine and hygiene were closely linked. Chinese doctors prescribed bathing and cleanliness as treatments. The Chinese also believed in the health benefits of certain herbs and minerals added to bath water. This wasn't just superstition. Some of these additives genuinely had antiseptic or therapeutic properties. Laundry and clothing. Chinese civilization was sophisticated about clothing hygiene. Silk, which was invented in China, was prized partly because it was easier to keep clean than wool. Professional launderers existed in cities. There were specific techniques for removing different types of stains. Wealthy people changed clothes frequently. Waste management. This is where China really stood out. They figured out something that many civilizations never did. Human waste is valuable. Waste was collected and composted for use as fertilizer. There were organized systems for waste collection in cities. Night soil collectors had an actual profession. They'd go around collecting human waste to sell to farmers. This was seen as practical, not gross. Yes, this meant cities still smelled, but it was better than just having waste piled up in streets, and it created a circular economy that was surprisingly sustainable. Philosophy and cleanliness. Confucianism emphasized order, ritual, and proper behavior, which extended to personal cleanliness. Being clean was part of being a good, civilized person. Taoism taught living in harmony with nature, which included bathing in natural springs and using natural cleaning methods. Buddhism, which spread to China, also emphasized cleanliness as part of spiritual practice. Why not higher? Despite all those innovations, China doesn't top our list because access varied hugely by class and region. Rural areas had much more basic hygiene. Urban sewage systems weren't as sophisticated as some other civilizations. Crowded cities still had major sanitation challenges. The verdict. China pioneered so many hygiene innovations that they have to rank high on our list. The invention of the toothbrush alone is a game changer for human history. Hygiene rating 7.5 out of 10. Innovative and practical, though implementation varied widely. Number 3, Ancient Rome, 753 BCE, 476 CE, the empire of public toilets. All right, now we're getting to the heavy hitters. Ancient Rome is famous for its baths, aqueducts, and sewers. Romans took hygiene seriously and built massive infrastructure to support it. But, and this is important, Roman hygiene was also kind of gross in ways we'll get to. The aqueducts. Rome's aqueducts are legendary for good reason. These massive stone structures carried millions of gallons of fresh water into the city every day from springs and lakes miles away. At Rome's peak, the city had 11 major aqueducts supplying water to public fountains, where most people got drinking water, public baths, private homes of the wealthy, public toilets, and decorative fountains. The engineering was sophisticated. Aqueducts used gravity to move water with carefully calculated slopes that kept water flowing without pumps. Some of these aqueducts are still standing 2,000 years later. This meant Romans had abundant fresh water, which put them head and shoulders above most ancient cities. The famous Roman baths. Roman baths, thermae, were incredible. They weren't just places to wash, they were social clubs, gyms, and community centers. A typical visit to a Roman bath involved exercise, work out in the palestra, exercise yard, undress, leave clothes in a changing room, though theft was common, warm room, tepidarium, start warming up, hot room, caldarium, really hot room with hot water pools, get sweaty. Scraping, have a slave or a friend scrape the sweat, oil, and dirt off your skin with a strigil. Cold plunge, frigidarium, jump into cold water to close your pores. Massage, get an oil massage. And socialize, hang out, eat snacks, maybe get a haircut or play games. Romans might visit the baths daily. It was a central part of Roman social life. The baths were open to everyone, men and women, usually at different times, rich and poor, citizens and slaves. The largest baths, like the baths of Caracalla or Diocletian, could accommodate thousands of people at once. They had libraries, gardens, restaurants, and they were heated by an ingenious system called the hypocaust, essentially underfloor heating, where hot air from furnaces circulated under the floors and in the walls. The toilets. Roman public toilets, latrinae, were an experience. They were communal, like you'd sit on a long bench with holes cut in it, right next to other people, and everyone would just go while chatting. No privacy whatsoever. Underneath was a channel of running water that carried waste away to the sewers. In front of you was another channel of clean water for washing. And here's the gross part. For wiping, Romans used a sponge on a stick called a tersorium or a xylospongium. You dip it in the water channel, use it, rinse it, and put it back next to the next for the next person. Yes, they shared the butt sponge. That's why it's called a communal sponge. I cannot emphasize enough how not hygienic this was from a modern perspective. How not hygienic this is from a modern perspective. But hey, at least they had running water. The sewer system. Rome's sewage system was genuinely impressive. The Cloaca Maxima Great Sewer, built around 600 BCE, was one of the world's first sewage systems. It carried wastewater and storm runoff from city to the Tiber River. Later sewers connected public toilets, baths, and even some private homes to this system. This kept waste off the streets mostly and flowing into the river. Sorry, people downstream. The sewers were large enough that the workers could walk through them for maintenance. Some were big enough that a horse drawn cart could fit through. Personal hygiene. Romans were generally clean people. Daily bathing was normal. They used various cleaning substances, including pumice stones and oils. Wealthy Romans changed clothes frequently. Barbers and hairdressers were common. Perfumes and scented oils were popular. However, they didn't have soap, or at least not what we'd recognize as soap. They used oil and strigil instead. This worked reasonably well for removing dirt and sweat, but it's not quite the same as soap and water. So why not number one? With all this impressive infrastructure, why isn't Rome at the top? Several reasons. The shared sponge, I cannot get past this, so unsanitary. Disease spread. Those wonderful communal baths, perfect for spreading diseases. Sitting in the same warm water as hundreds of other people is a microbiologist's nightmare. Lead pipes. Romans used lead for water pipes, which slowly poisoned people. not great. Waste in the river. They were just dumping everything into the Tiber, which people downstream used. Outside Rome, most of this infrastructure was limited to major cities. Rural Romans had much more basic hygiene. No soap. Oil and scraping is okay, but soap is better. The verdict: Rome built incredible infrastructure and made bathing a daily social ritual. They're deservedly famous for their hygiene systems, but there were some seriously unsanitary practices mixed in with the impressive engineering. Hygiene rating 8 out of 10. Amazing infrastructure, questionable execution on some details. Number 2, the Indus Valley Civilization. 3300, 1300 BCE, the ancient plumbing masters. Here's where we get into the truly impressive stuff. The Indus Valley Civilization, also called the Harappan Civilization, was doing things with plumbing and sanitation that most of the world wouldn't figure out for thousands of years. This civilization existed in what's now Pakistan and northwest India, and it was huge. At its peak, it covered more territory than ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia, and they were shockingly advanced about hygiene. The Great Bath. In the city of Mohenjo-Daro, archaeologists found something called the Great Bath, a massive public bathing pool that dates to around 2500 BCE. This thing was sophisticated, watertight thanks to layers of bitumen, natural tar, had steps leading down into it, had a sophisticated drainage system, fresh water supply system, changing rooms around it, may have been used for religious rituals as well as bathing. This is one of the earliest public baths ever discovered, and it shows that hygiene and ritual cleanliness were important to this civilization from early on. Indoor plumbing. Here's what really sets the Indus Valley apart. Nearly every house in their cities had indoor bathrooms and toilets. Let me repeat that. In 2500 BCE, regular middle-class homes in Indus Valley cities had private bathrooms with running water and flush toilets. Europe wouldn't achieve this until the 19th century. How it worked. Houses had dedicated bathroom rooms. Water was brought in from wells or public water sources. Bathrooms had drains built into the floors. Some had raised toilet seats over drainage pipes. Used bathwater and waste would flow through covered drains under the streets. These drains connected to a sophisticated sewerage system. The sewerage system. The Indus Valley sewerage system was mind-blowingly advanced. Every street had covered drains running alongside it. These were made of brick and regularly cleaned through manholes. Waste from houses flowed into street drains. Street drains connected to larger main drains. The system had setting tanks to separate solid waste from water. Regular inspection and cleaning was built into the system. This is urban planning at a level that most ancient cities never achieved. The streets of Mohenjo-Daro or Harappa were cleaner than the streets of London or Paris would be 3,000 years later. The Indus people were masters of water management, wells throughout the city providing clean drinking water, separate systems for fresh water and wastewater, water storage tanks, sophisticated understanding of drainage and water flow. Archaeological evidence suggests that they understood the importance of keeping clean water separate from wastewater, a concept many later civilizations failed to grasp. Evidence suggests Indus Valley people bathed regularly, possibly daily, had combs for hair care, many have been found, used small stone or shell containers, possibly for cosmetics or hygiene products, had mirrors made of polished copper took care of personal appearance. Why not number one? So why isn't the Indus Valley civilization at the top of our list? Honestly, they could be. They had the most sophisticated sanitation infrastructure, but there are a few factors. We don't know everything. The Indus script hasn't been deciphered, so we have no written records about their hygiene practices. Everything we know is from archaeology. Limited to cities. While their cities were incredibly advanced, we don't know much about rural areas. Bathing frequency uncertain. We know they had the infrastructure, but we don't know if they used it daily or less frequently. No clear evidence of soap. We haven't found evidence of soap or soap like products, though they may have existed and just not survived. The verdict. The Indus Valley civilization had plumbing and sanitation that was objectively better than what most of human history achieved. They figured out urban sanitation in 2500 BCE, and then the civilization declined, and this knowledge was apparently lost for thousands of years. It's genuinely tragic that we lost this level of sophistication. If these systems have been maintained and spread, human history might have been a lot less smelly. Hygiene rating 9 out of 10. Objectively, the most advanced sanitation infrastructure in the ancient world. Number 1, the Aztec Empire, 1345 to 1521 CE. The surprisingly clean champions, clean kings. And here we are at number 1. The cleanest ancient civilization was the Aztec. Yes, really, the civilization that practiced human sacrifice was also the civilization that bathed twice daily and had cleaner cities than most of Europe. History is full of surprises. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in Tenochtitlan, modern-day Mexico City, in 1519, they were absolutely blown away by how clean it was. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, a conquistador who was there, wrote about how the city was cleaner and better organized than any European city he'd ever seen. The markets were spotless, the streets were swept daily, the canals were clean, even the air smelled better than Spanish cities. And this is coming from people who were actively trying to conquer and colonize the Aztecs, so they had every reason to portray them as savages. But even Spanish propaganda couldn't deny that Aztec cities were really, really, really clean. Aztecs took bathing very seriously. Most Aztecs bathed at least once a day, often twice, morning and evening. Steam baths, temazcali. These were small dome-shaped steam rooms used for deep cleaning, medicine, and relaxation. Cold baths. After steam baths, people would often plunge into cold water. Hair washing. Aztecs washed their hair regularly and used various plant-based soaps. The temazcal tradition is still practiced in Mexico today. It's basically a pre-Columbian sauna, and it was used not just for cleanliness, but for treating illness and even for women giving birth. Aztecs had figured out how to make soap from various plants. Soap from the saponin-rich roots of soapwort plants. Cleaning agents from yucca roots. Various herbs and minerals mixed to create cleaning substances. These weren't exactly like modern soap, but they were effective cleaning agents that could create lather and remove dirt and oils. Dental hygiene. Aztecs were serious about oral hygiene. They cleaned their teeth regularly using charcoal, herbs, and salt. Chewed various plants that helped clean teeth and freshen breath. Bad breath was considered highly offensive in Aztec culture. Regular dental care was expected of everyone, not just the wealthy. The Aztec capital was built on an island in a lake, which presented unique challenges. Their solutions were ingenious. Public toilets. Tenochtitlan had public toilets throughout the city. Waste from these was collected and used as fertilizer for the chinampas, floating gardens. Waste collection. There were workers whose specific job was to collect human waste for agricultural use. This kept streets clean and provided valuable fertilizer. Street cleaning. The streets were swept daily by workers. There were laws against littering and dumping waste in public areas. Aqueducts. Fresh water was brought to the city via aqueducts from mainland springs. These were sophisticated structures that provided clean drinking water. Separate water systems. The Aztecs kept fresh water and wastewater strictly separate. Canals. The city had canals that were regularly cleaned. Boats would collect garbage and waste for disposal outside the city. Clothing and laundry. Aztecs were particular about clean clothing. People were expected to wear clean clothes. Laundry was done regularly. Different types of stains had different cleaning methods. Wealthy people changed clothes frequently, sometimes several times a day. The Spanish noted that even poor Aztecs kept their clothes cleaner than many wealthy Europeans. Body hair. Aztecs had different grooming standards than Europeans. Men typically had little facial hair naturally, but removed what they had. Body hair removal was common. This was partly aesthetic, partly practical in a hot climate. When hairy Spanish conquistadors showed up, Aztecs thought they looked unkempt and uncivilized. Multiple Spanish accounts note that Tenochtitlan smelled good, or at least smelled better than Spanish cities. This was because regular bathing by most people, effective waste removal, use of perfumes and aromatic herbs, clean streets and canals, less crowding than European cities. Meanwhile, the Spanish, who bathed infrequently and wore heavy wool clothing in the Mexican heat, smelled absolutely terrible to the Aztecs. There were Aztecs accounts complaining how bad the Spanish smelled. This is where the historical irony comes in. The Spanish viewed the Aztecs as primitive and uncivilized, while simultaneously smelling so bad that the Aztecs couldn't stand being near them. Cleanliness was deeply embedded in the Aztec culture and religion. Being clean was associated with being civilized and moral. Dirtiness was seen as shameful and potentially spiritually polluting. Children were taught from a young age about the importance of hygiene. Religious ceremonies involved ritual bathing. The goddess Tlazotliotl was associated with purification and cleansing, both physical and spiritual. Why number one? The Aztecs win our ranking because they combined daily bathing. Unlike most ancient civilizations, this was universal, not just for the wealthy. Sophisticated urban sanitation. Tenochtitlan was cleaner than contemporary European cities. Soap and cleaning products. They had figured out effective cleaning agents. Cultural emphasis. Cleanliness was a core value, not just practical. Dental hygiene. They actually cared about teeth. Sustainable waste management. Human waste was valuable fertilizer, not just garbage. Implementation. These practices were widespread, not limited to elites. The tragedy. Here's the sad part. The Spanish conquest destroyed most of this. Spanish colonial authorities discouraged or banned many indigenous practices, including the Temazcal steam baths, viewing them as pagan. They replaced Aztec urban planning with European-style cities that were far less sanitary. They introduced European attitudes about bathing being unhealthy. Yes, really. Many Europeans thought bathing was dangerous. Within a century of Spanish conquest, Mexican cities were dirtier and less hygienic than they had been under Aztec rule. It took hundreds of years for modern sanitation to bring cleanliness levels back to where the Aztecs had them in 1519. The verdict. The Aztecs were genuinely the cleanest civilization in the ancient world. They took daily bathing seriously, had sophisticated urban sanitation, and culturally valued cleanliness. They were cleaner than contemporary Europe by a wide margin. Hygiene rating 9.5 out of 10. Honorable mentions. Before we wrap up, let's give quick shout outs to civilizations that didn't quite make our main list but still deserve recognition. The Maya, the Aztecs' predecessors and contemporaries in Mesoamerica, also had good hygiene practices. Regular bathing in cenotes, natural sinkholes, and streams. Steam baths similar to Temazcali. Urban planning that included waste management. Lost some points because jungle cities had unique challenges with moisture and decay. Rating 7.5 out of 10. The Minoans, Bronze Age Crete. The ancient Greek civilization before classical Greece was surprisingly advanced, had sophisticated plumbing with running water in palaces, flush toilets in some buildings, advanced drainage systems, unfortunately limited to palaces and elite areas. Rating 6.5 out of 10. The Incas, another Mesoamerican civilization with good hygiene, mountain cities with sophisticated water management, regular bathing in natural springs, effective waste management using terraced agriculture, similar practices to the Aztecs but less documented. Rating 7.5 out of 10. The big picture, what can we learn? Looking at all those civilizations, a few patterns emerge. 1. Clean water access is everything. The civilizations that ranked highest all solved the problem of bringing clean water to lots of people, whether it was Roman aqueducts, Indus Valley wells, or Aztec spring systems. Access to water made everything else possible. 2. Cultural attitudes matter. Having the technology isn't enough, you need cultural buy-in. The Greeks had bathhouse technology but didn't prioritize daily bathing. The Aztecs made cleanliness a core value and everybody participated. 3. Urban planning is underrated. The civilizations with the cleanest cities, Indus Valley Aztecs, planned their cities around sanitation from the start. Trying to add sewerage to an existing city is much harder than building it in from the beginning. 4. Class matters. In most ancient civilizations, hygiene quality varied dramatically by social class. What made the Aztecs and Indus Valley special was that even regular people had access to good sanitation. 5. We lost knowledge. The Indus Valley had flush toilets in 2500 BCE. The Aztecs had daily bathing and clean cities in 1500 CE. Then both civilizations fell and this knowledge was lost. Europe wouldn't achieve comparable sanitation until the late 1800s. This is genuinely tragic. If this knowledge had been preserved and spread, we could have prevented millions of deaths from waterborne diseases throughout history. The modern perspective. Here is something to think about. Even the cleanest ancient civilization would seem pretty gross by modern standards. The Aztecs, our winners, didn't have indoor plumbing in homes, except maybe palaces, modern sewage treatment, water purification, understanding of germ theory, modern soap with antibacterial properties, showers as we know them, washing machines, modern dentistry. They were the best of their time, but their time was still pretty rough by our standards. On the flip side, the Aztecs bathed more often than most Americans did in the 1800s. They had cleaner cities than London or Paris in the Renaissance. They understood waste management better than most of Europe until the modern era. Sometimes primitive civilizations were more advanced than we give them credit for. Conclusion. Why does this matter? You might be thinking, okay, cool history lesson, but why do I care about ancient bathing habits? First, it's a reminder that progress isn't linear. We sometimes lose knowledge and have to relearn it. The sanitation of the Indus Valley or Aztec Empire was lost and took around thousands of years to rediscover. Second, it challenges our assumption about which civilizations were advanced. The Spanish thought they were bringing civilization to the Americas while being significantly dirtier than the people they conquered. Third, it shows that the cultural values shape technology adoption. Having good technology isn't enough. People need to value using it. Fourth, it's a reminder to appreciate modern plumbing. Every day you take a hot shower with soap and flush a toilet, you're living better than emperors did for most of human history. And finally, it's just fascinating. History isn't just for kings and battles, it's also people trying to figure out how to not smell terrible and how to keep poop out of their drinking water. The Aztecs solved this problem better than almost anyone else in the ancient world. They bathed twice daily, kept their cities clean, and valued personal hygiene as a virtue. Meanwhile, the Spanish conquistadors who destroyed their civilization probably haven't bathed in weeks and thought water was dangerous. History is full of ironies, but that might be one of the biggest. So there you have it, the ancient world ranked by hygiene. From Mesopotamia's well we tried approach to the Aztecs' surprisingly sophisticated sanitation systems. Next time you take a hot shower, maybe think about thousands of years of human trial and error that went into making that possible. And maybe appreciate that you don't have to share a communal butt sponge with strangers at the public toilets. Progress is real, folks. Sweet dreams and enjoy your modern plumbing.